Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Lance here, and today I want to talk about something that might be a little uncomfortable, just because this is probably one of the things that I see more often, literally, than any other questions that I get, and it happens to be one that I struggle with as well. So, the question that I got here, and again, I get different variations of this, but this is the one I got. Lance, I struggle with emotional eating, but no matter what I do, I can't seem to get it under control. So every time I start losing weight, I seem to screw it all up. Is this my discipline? Now, this particular person kind of went on to ask, is this discipline? Do I have issues? Is this a sugar issue? Is this there's so much concern as to what is going on because this particular individual deeply, deeply desires to get where they want to go. And where they want to go is to be, well, let's just put it this way, is to be more confident, to have vitality, to have energy, but more important for this individual, and I'm not even sharing the gender, this individual really, really desires to be able to walk past a mirror without looking at themselves with disgust. So needless to say, this particular person, now again, I have battled with this, I'm going to share this in a second, but this particular individual, if you've ever been there, where you walk past a mirror and you're not narcissistic, you don't want to see, it's not like you're looking for vanity, but you can't help stopping yourself. It's like those comedy movies where they're like, oh my gosh, that smells horrible, here, smell it. And you do, you smell it. It's the same sort of scenario. You walk past, you don't want to see what's there, but you can't help yourself, so you look, and immediately you start picking yourself apart. Now, I don't know if you've been there, but this has been my life. I've done this 1.5 million times. And the fact is that what happens is, next thing, after I'm doing all this self-loathing bullcrap that takes away my joy, the next thing I notice is I begin to start feeling emotional. Now, again, this is one avenue. This is one area. It doesn't mean that this is like the root of why I emotionally eat or what have you. But what I'm saying is in this particular scenario, this would usually lead to a defeatist mindset over, let's say it's on a Friday, and over the weekend, my mood would be shifted. I might go do something, I might be with people, but I'm not fully present because all I'm sitting there thinking is what that image was when I walked past and saw what I didn't like. Now, it may surprise you, but for me, I do this and I'll look at myself and, for example, even though I've gotten myself into good shape, the old habits still come through that start telling you you're not good enough, you're not this enough, you're not big enough, you're not lean enough, your biceps aren't thick enough, your legs don't look, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just sharing with you that these are the sort of things that cause someone like me to kind of fall prey into those things too. So here's the deal. Number one is that I want to show you I battle with this myself. Number two, if you try and correct this in the moment, meaning that you've got one of those nights where, or a day, whatever it is, where you get home, you're feeling crazy emotional, and maybe you've been here and all you're thinking is, gosh, man, what a week. You know what? Screw this. I don't know what I'm going to do, but you know what sounds good? I'm going to get a pizza. I'm going to, have a little bit of wine, and I'm going to eat some ice cream and watch a movie. Screw it. I don't need this crap. I'm going to give myself a little bit of a treat. I deserve this at the end of the week. Okay, this is one example of emotional eating that could lead to binge eating. Okay, this is a common one for me. Now, another one might more or less be where you're crazy stressed throughout the day. Now, this one happens to me a lot, and your appetite isn't there because it's not a stress of like, I'm overwhelmed, it's more worry. When I'm worried, I tend to lose my appetite. So this is now this happened literally this week. Okay, now for me, it wasn't the same sense of worry. I just was overwhelmed with a few different things, etc. And not feeling well, sinus infection stuff going on. So I don't have an appetite throughout the day. And then what happens as your nerves settle, you start getting a little bit calmer throughout the day. All of a sudden now the hunger hormones start kicking in and you're like, man, I'm hungry, but you feel a little bit deprived. And again, especially if you've had one of those emotional days, you begin to either A, rationalize with yourself as to why you should have what you're having, or B, there's zero rationalization at all. You simply find yourself elbow deep in a pantry or elbow deep inside the fridge, and you're wondering how in the flip Did I do this again? I've got my goals. I know what I want to do. Why do I keep doing this? Well, the fact is that the practice to do this is before we get to this day. That day where you're emotional and you're trying to hope that you have enough discipline to say no to the entire bag of Cheetos, or to the entire sleeve of donuts or cookies or whatever it is. Maybe it's not that excessive. Maybe it's you having 4 donuts, 4 little mini donuts, or it's having like 6 or 7 little cookies. Whatever it is, the fact is that the time to practice, to make sure that you don't fail when you're in this position, is to work on this long before we get to this point. So what I mean by this simply is that we've got to begin working on affirmations. We've got to make sure that the areas of self-care that we might be neglecting, the areas of sleep that we might be neglecting, any areas where we're not giving direct attention to that might lead to overwhelm, to fear, to worries, anxiety, etc., you can almost bet that if you're like me and you've had emotional eating problems, what we're doing is we are trying to solve, we're not necessarily trying to solve the entire problem of whatever we're going through. That would be illogical, but to a point, our psyche knows that we're trying to change the state of pain that we feel. If I'm emotional and feeling like I've had a rough day or whatever, I'm in a state that feels uncomfortable. Now, whether I acknowledge that or not, that's the real scenario. I'm in a state of discomfort, and my mind begins to come up with ways to either allow me to chase a dopamine rush, or a way that basically gives me some sort of peace or some sort of relief, okay? Some sort of reprieve from what I've gone through. Now, there are crazy healthy ways to do this, but normally, if we've had one of those weeks where we're not self-caring, or when things just kind of snowball and escalate, by this point, we don't really kind of find ourselves going, okay, well, I feel overwhelmed. What should I do? What we do is just find ourselves in the pantry and we're doing this and we go, this doesn't fit my goals. What's going on here? And we start freaking out. I've been there a million times myself, but the key is that we've got to make sure that long before we get here, because if you're waiting until your hand is in the donut bag to hope that you have the discipline to pull it out, you're going to fail every time. And so the real key on this is actually having a system, what we call a GPS. And so the GPS system is kind of like this. A map kind of guides you and tells you like what to do, but it doesn't really tell you like if there's bad weather, if there's construction, if there's anything unforeseen, how to still reach your destination. A GPS, if it's connected like it should be, will absolutely do that. It'll warn you of construction. It'll tell you if there's slow traffic, if there was an accident. We want a GPS for your fitness, for emotional eating, for all of these things that simply warn you long before you're in the ditch with your elbow, and you're just shoving donuts in your mouth. That's considered being in the ditch, if we're using GPS and driving analogies. Long before we find ourselves in the ditch and we're trying to get ourselves out of there, doesn't it make more sense to have a GPS that warns you and says, hey, Lance, you're starting to drift over towards the ditch. You need to pull it back over. Or, hey, Lance, up ahead, there's some construction. It's going to cost you 30 minutes. You may want to take this turn. Translation into fitness is, hey, Lance, you're starting to feel a little bit anxious. You're noticing that you're not sleeping as much. You may need to remedy this before you get to that point where you're elbow deep in a bag of donuts. And so the reality is, a lot of times we ignore it because we're busy, we've got things going on, or it's not really that big of a deal. We diminish whatever's happening, and then we find ourselves in that position. And then the final stage of this is we begin to shame ourselves and beat ourselves up. Why do I do this? It's this. And then we start setting more rigid and more, I would say, unsustainable habits to start punishing ourselves, hoping that this will finally get the weight off, or that this will make us feel like we're in control of something, or in control of ourselves if you feel like you're out of control of that. But the fact of it is that sometimes this is due to mismanaged stressors, and other times it's due to too much restriction. Okay, so if you are living a restricted lifestyle and you're finding yourself binge eating or emotional eating, chances are you need more flexibility. Again, this is going to come back to a GPS system that says, hey, your nerves are starting to get a little bit frayed. You probably need to incorporate a few more fun foods so that you can enjoy life a little bit more. But the fact is that if we don't do this, we find ourselves in the ditch, using that same analogy again. So here's what we want to do. We want to make sure that we've got a GPS that shows you exactly how to get back into alignment and shows you when you're basically getting too far away from self-care to actually cause that ruined day where you end up emotionally eating or binge eating or whatever the scenario might be. The last thing is that if you didn't make it and you screwed up, okay, you get to this emotional eating point, you need to know that this is simply you being out of alignment. This is not falling off of some wagon. And if you have the mentality that every time that this happens, you're falling off of some sort of proverbial wagon, you're going to create shame and some form of guilt repeatedly, so much so that you begin to punish yourself or treat yourself in a self-loathing manner. So keep in mind that when you're struggling with this area, know that it was because you didn't put enough practice in on the game field or put in practice on the, well, I guess we'll call it a practice field, but put enough practice in on the field before game time. So again, the whole thing is like if you're on some sort of sports team and you're not showing up for practice and you're wondering why you're not having the same performance on your game as what's in your head and what you think you should do, you know that it's because of practice. You're not showing up and putting up that practice time. This is the same scenario when it comes to emotional eating. If you understand it's not a discipline issue, what it really is practicing self-care, practicing actually seeking out which outcomes would be best when you have emotional situations. Now what this means is when you're lonely, you reach out to a friend. You don't go to the pantry. What this means is when you're bored, you watch a movie or you create something instead of going to the pantry or going to the fridge. Okay? When you've had a long day and you're stressed and overwhelmed, you call a friend, you go to a counselor, you read a book, you pray, you don't go to the fridge or the pantry. Then what happens is when you're hungry, you go to the fridge or the pantry. But again, this is where it's planned. So I hope that this has helped you guys. If you feel like this is something that resonates, if you feel like you want to get deeper help to actually learn a little bit more of what a GPS system might look like for you to prevent the emotional and binge eating, where you are elbow deep in a bag of Funyuns or you've got chocolate on your face because you've just shoveled in so much stuff. Guys, I've been there. I've done this a million times. And thanks to having a system to help me to stay in self-care and prevent this, it's not a common thing for me anymore. Does it happen? Yeah, it happens to me still. Why? Because I'm human. And sometimes, even though I have this GPS system, I might get overwhelmed during the week and be focused on work instead of my goals. And I start slipping out of alignment. And the next thing you know, I'm emotional eating. Does it mean my GPS didn't work? No, it simply means that I took my eyes right off the GPS. Does it mean that I should not use it? No, it just simply means that I've got to figure out, like, all right, what's happening? Each time I'm taking my eyes off the GPS, it's usually because of X. When I solve for X, I can figure out, oh, I'm not sleeping enough. Oh, I'm stressed out, or I've got friends that don't have boundaries, or I've got colleagues who don't have boundaries, or I feel dissatisfied or unsatiated. Whatever these things are, these things begin to lead to emotional discourse, and that is what leads to the emotional eating. If you try and solve this at the symptom, which is smack in your hand, every time you're eating something that you feel like you shouldn't, you're going to fail every time. And this is what most trainers and coaches do. They tell you, you shouldn't do that, and you should think of food as fuel, and you shouldn't be this way. Why not focus on cutting it off at the root? Let's start working on the emotions. Let's start working on self-care and actually focusing on alignment and flexibility of your nutrition instead of the rigidness that leads to this. Does that sound better? It works, guys. If you want help with this, send me a DM or put hashtag me in the comments below, and we can start chatting just a little bit about your struggles, what your goals might be, and the best strategy to actually get you where you want to go, but not temporarily.